Hello, welcome to this live stream of what hopefully might be the first of many. We'll see. Depends on how well it all turns out. Where I am sitting down and interviewing my lovely grandmother. And rather than introduce her, I'll go ahead and have her introduce herself. Tell us who you are, your full name, if you can remember it all.
And that requires some effort. I mean, you want each of the marriages mentioned? Okay. I was born or blessed Elda Marie Pope. My first marriage was to George Alma Thatcher, who lived to be 44 years old and then passed away. And after that, I was married to Orton Eugene, and he was known as Gene Lewis. And that was 28 years. And then he passed away, and after about 2 years, I married Max Osmond Hatch, whom I had fallen in love with when I was a teenager, but that didn't go anywhere because military service interrupted. And he went far, far away. With, I think it was somewhere over 220 flights over the Himalayas somewhere between China, Burma, and India.
Wow. So put it all together.
Put it all together. I've had a wonderful life.
So the name that you go by now, though, is?
Hatch.
Elda Hatch. All right. All right. So, but your name, Elda Marie Pope, is there anything special or unusual about your name or the way you were named?
Well, as I remember what I was told, the Marie is just a traditional family name. But the Elda was one that at the time that I was named Elda, nobody in the family had heard it, except that my grandmother reported that she dreamed that the baby she was carrying was named Elda. But Grandma's baby was a boy, born 6 months before I was. And Elda sounded more like a feminine name. So it was not used for Robert Gerald Jacobson. It waited another 6 months, and Mother liked it and Daddy liked it. And so when they had a little girl, Elda seemed to be the right name. So I am Elda Marie Pope.
There you go.
You want me to add the others?
No, I don't think we need to this time. I should mention really quickly that the questions that I am asking at the moment are from a list that was actually given to us by your daughter, my Aunt Janet. I'm not sure where she found them, but they are divided into really helpful sections, and they're also numbered in each section. But I feel like we should just kind of go through them as they are. And
because it's a good guide.
It is a very good guide. And so the first two questions, the name and more about your name, both come from the family history section of this guide, and we're going to continue through there. Those of you who are watching us live, it looks like there are a couple of you. Yay, it's actually working. That's fantastic to know. You should be able to, question mark, I'm not entirely sure how it works, submit questions through the live interface somehow. I'm not entirely sure how. However, you should also probably be members of my family. So if you are, if you would kindly, for my sake, just shoot me text messages or similar messages that won't interrupt us too much because they'll probably go to my phone. Just letting me know kind of what the quality is like, how things are working. I would appreciate that. But let's move on now. You talked a little bit about your birth. You were born 6 months after your uncle. But talk to us about what the actual date was, of course, and where you were born.
Okay. My family hadn't been in Hinckley very long. They'd moved from Randolph, Utah in Rich County to Hinckley, Utah in Millard County, so it's a long distance from one to the other. can't decide if this little in something that was said by one of the children when I was still quite young, but not the one that was young, not the one that mentioned this particular thing, but we didn't have a home that was ours. We were renting. The family was renting, and the need to move was frequent because people wanted their homes back or whatever was going on. And at one time, one of my siblings said to my parents, every time we move, we get a new baby, and we're going to move 6 more times. And as it turned out, they did move 6 more times before they quit having children. So, just the funny little things that happen in life, and that one was a cute one I thought wouldn't hurt to include here. So, anyway, Hinckley was a very small town, and job opportunities were not good there. And my grandparents were living in Hinckley when we moved there, but they had returned to Provo, where they'd had a house built on the property that Grandma had inherited from her father. So, and the property is now just east of the Noahs, north of the Provo airport. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going.
Well, when were you born? What's your actual birth date?
Okay, January 29th, 1924.
And you say your family lived in Hinckley when you were born, but
right.
Where were you? Where was your mother when you were born?
At home in
birth.
Hinckley. Mm-hmm.
Was there a midwife or a doctor at the time?
Yes, there was a midwife. I can't remember. Her first name was Mary, but I can't remember her last name.
But you were born in 1924, so that makes you 91 years old at the time of recording, which is, I guess I should have mentioned earlier, this is August the 2nd, 2015.
Okay, that's established pretty well now then.
Yeah, well, depending on where this video finds itself in the far-flung reaches of time, at the moment it's going right onto YouTube, which includes all that information. But so we're here in your home now in Provo doing this interview. Talk to us about your brothers and sisters, because you had several. Give us, if you can, just kind of in order of age, what their name was, how old either they are at the moment or they were when they passed away, and about when they.
My older brother, Robert Delvar Pope, he was, how old was Delvar when he passed away? Late 80s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But he is gone now. And he suffered for several years with Parkinson's disease before he passed away.
And was he the oldest?
And he was the oldest, yes. And I was number 2. And my daddy always called me his number 1 daughter.
And who came after you?
My sister was Mary Arlene, and we called her Arlene. Mm-hmm. She was 19 months younger than I, but it didn't take her very long to get bigger than I was. So I was always the oldest there. I thought I was the boss, but because she was the biggest, she thought she should be. And so we had some scraps when Mama wasn't looking. But she was bigger than I, so I was the underdog in those situations.
And who was number 4?
Let's see. Right. That was the one we called Amy. Her name was Amaryllis. But because Mother and Daddy had never heard the name, it was spelled the same as Amaryllis. And they didn't like Amaryllis. So she would be called Amaryllis at school. or other places. And so, because they didn't like that pronunciation, as a family we nicknamed her Amy. And Amy stuck. So today she is Amy to us and Aunt Amy to her nieces and nephews. But on paper is Amaryllis or Amaryllis.
We'll stay with Amaryllis since that's kind of what
Stay
your
with
parents.
Amaryllis because that's what Daddy and Mother named. She was blessed as Amaryllis.
And who was after her?
Who was after that? Arnold Clinton. And he lives now in Lehigh. Has a wonderful family. And
How old is he now?
let's see, he is 8 years younger than I. So that would make him 83, wouldn't it?
8 years younger than 61, yeah, 83. Or than 91, obviously. Sorry.
Oh, hey, turn it back. It's not that easy, though, is it? And then Charles was 2 years younger. Well, 23 months younger than Arnold. And the one that came after him was Leland Ted. And we lost him when he was 8 years old. He was too close to the back end of a horse and got kicked in the abdomen. And the doctors, he was taken to the hospital, but the doctors just didn't pay attention. And he was losing blood pressure, but they couldn't determine, they didn't try hard enough to determine what was causing the loss of blood pressure. And the kick in the stomach had ruptured something internally. And he was bleeding internally, but because the bleeding wasn't seeable,
yeah,
it wasn't investigated adequately, and we lost him. I was in Corpus Christi, Texas at that time with my husband, George Thatcher.
Yeah.
So going home for Teddy's funeral was very, I couldn't stay away, and yet the trip by myself and my husband couldn't get leave from the military. It was a lonely, difficult trip. I went by train from Corpus Christi to Provo. But when I returned to Corpus Christi, I went by bus, and that was even worse.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to go back to that lonely life where my husband was only home in the wee hours of the night and left early in the morning, and I was alone the rest of the day, and I didn't adjust very well to that.
No, sure.
And there were so many military wives wanting employment in Corpus Christi, and there were not enough jobs to go around. So I didn't find, I found part-time work here and there, but it was unpleasant, and I didn't have transportation. And at one of the jobs, I don't know whether I ought to tell you this one or not, but anyway, it was one that George found for me and had me lined up to take when I got there.
Yeah.
And when I got there and read the books that they had on maids to order, and I quickly found out that one of the responsibilities they wanted me to take was to be a prostitute for her husband's friends. And that wasn't something I could live with.
No.
So I didn't stay any longer there, and it was difficult for me to find another job.
I'm sure.
But then pretty quickly after that, we did find, I can't remember what we did before we found an apartment, a place, a house, not was it was in a kind of a military housing unit
Mm-hmm.
because he was in the military and that was available there, but it took a little while to get into it. But it felt good to feel in a safer place.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Going back now, was Ted the last of your parents' children?
The last of my parents' children?
Yeah.
No. There was a baby girl. She only lived a few hours.
Oh.
And she was born just a couple days before my scheduled wedding. And George felt like he had put so much effort into getting permission to have time off to get married.
Yeah.
That he wanted me to go ahead with the wedding. Anyway, we were stationed. He was stationed in Logan at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like it was 1,000 miles away from home. And my father and George's father were in Logan for that wedding. And it seemed like everything that could go wrong did. It was required to have a blood test in order to get a marriage license at that time. They didn't require it in the military because they had records. The military had records of their stuff. But my test come back, anyway, it coagulated before the test was run, so they weren't able to get a good test on it. And I can't remember exactly what the title of the situation was, but a judge could approve the marriage license without that test if he chose to. But that judge was out of town. But he got back in time to do it anyway. So the trip to Logan wasn't exactly anyway. I can laugh about it now, but it was quite serious at that time because Grandpa Thatcher was so negative and absolutely certain that this was not going to happen. And I had taken the attitude that it would happen if it was supposed to happen. If it didn't happen, it wasn't supposed to. So the fact that things fell in place so that we could be married and just told me that that's what the Lord wanted at this particular time for George and I.
That's great. You've talked a lot about your parents. Now tell us more about them. What were their names and when and where were they born?
Okay. My mother was Leona Marie Jacobson, spelled with an S-O-N.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't like it to be with an S-E-N because it was too close to sin. So anyway, my mother was the oldest of my grandmother's children. That's what made it possible for me to have an uncle that was only 6 months younger. And Bob and I were very good friends as teenagers.
Yeah.
And Daddy didn't have any further education than just the 8th grade in the small town where they grew up. And Mother's family was kind of between Randolph and Provo. They'd spend part of their time in Randolph and part of their time in Provo. And Grandpa had a store, a grocery in meat market,
Which grandpa?
Grandpa Jacobson in Randolph. And the year my mother and dad got married, Grandma was expecting a baby and wanted her husband in Provo where she was.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only other person that could handle the store in Randolph at that time was my mother, Leona, and they didn't feel good about leaving her there alone
No.
that time. And she and my father had been in love for several years and knew they wanted to be married, but they were too young. But under the circumstances, anyway, can't remember whether mother was just a few months older than daddy or daddy a few months older than mother. I can't remember that for sure. But anyway, they did get permission to get married so that Grandpa could go from Randolph to Provo to be where the new baby was born.
What was your father's name?
Orlan, Orlan, Clinton Pope.
You said that they were young when they were married. How young?
I think they were 18 and 19. Mother was a little bit older than Daddy.
Yeah.
A few months, if I remember right, and I'm not sure my memory's right anymore. Mm-hmm. But we could look that up if I had my records here, but I don't have. So.
Now, obviously, neither of them are still living, so when did they pass on?
My father, it was an industrial accident. He was a groundsman for Provo City Power, but his boss didn't abide by the rules and sent him up in a cherry picker. You know what a cherry picker is?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody else probably does too then.
The groundsman is actually what's more confusing. It's kind of obvious, but...
Yeah, but that was one that wasn't supposed to be up on the poles.
Yeah. His
work was to be done on the ground. But his boss didn't abide by the rules and ordered him up, and he got up. In the process, there was, as I understand it, a piece of heavy equipment with a long thing that extended into the air quite a bit. Anyway, he come across I don't know what to call it. Anyway, it was a line that went from one side of the road to the other.
A power line, an overhang there, yeah.
I don't know whether, it had to, anyway. They figured it had about 22,000 volts of power in it. And
oh, wow.
It hit Dad across the back up there in that cherry picker. And he lived for 70 days after. But the power was so intense that it burned the flesh off his fingers.
Oh dear.
As well as off his back, around his spine where it hit him in mid-back. And because his hands were on the metal, it went right to, the power went to the metal through his body. And Daddy lived in the hospital for 70 days after those tremendous burns.
Wow. That's unpleasant. What about your mother?
My mother stayed nights in the hospital for those 70 days. She'd go home and sleep in the daytime, be there with Daddy at night. She never again regained the ability to sleep at night.
Oh, that's sad.
Although it was several years before she passed away after that.
When did she pass away?
She was 93 when she passed away, and I can't remember the year. She was born in 01.
She's born in 1901.
Uh-huh.
Wow. So to 93, that would have been 1994 or thereabout. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Talk about 1994.
Well, about your mother's passing.
Oh, uh, I was in the habit of going on Friday morning to her place to do her hair before taking her up to the temple where she would spend 4 hours at the prayer roll desk. And when I went, the door was still locked when I got up to her home. So there was a key where I knew where it was, and I let myself in and went to the bedroom because she wasn't up anywhere. And my impression when I saw Mother realize that she was gone was that Daddy came for her, and she started to, she got up, getting out of bed to where her legs were over the side of the bed. And I just, in my head, I imagined Daddy saying, "You won't need that body, dear. The children will take care of it." And so she was getting up to go with Daddy, but she didn't need that body. So it was left on the bed with the legs over the side. And that took some of the sting out of losing Mother.
Yeah, I'm sure. Not been easy. All right. I'm going to make a real quick interlude. Those of you watching live, if you're having trouble finding the way to submit questions, I'm not. Again, this is a new system for me as well. I'm not 100% sure what you're looking at. But if it's anything like the screen that I've pulled up here to kind of try and monitor things, up in the about center, just a little bit right of center, there's a number of buttons and taskbars there that you can click one of them, which looks like a grid. If you click that, you should be able to switch from Showcase to Q&A, and Q&A is where you can submit questions of your own. So just a little bit of housekeeping for those watching live at the moment.
Wouldn't it be nice if there were some watching now?
I know that there are. I have a nice tally here that tells me there's at least 3 people who are streaming this live. At least 3 devices that are streaming this live. There could be more people watching each of those devices. Okay. I have a feeling, I could be wrong, but I have a feeling that at least in my house there's more than one person watching one of these devices.
So how would anybody else know how to tune in?
Those who wish to watch along, I've posted the links to follow on Facebook mostly, so that they can watch. They can find them there. All right. Let us see. What's our next question here? Let's talk more about your parents. What were their occupations? It seems like let's start with your mother. Was she a stay-at-home mom, or did she work often? You talked a bit about the shop she worked for her father up in Randolph,
yes, but
for most of her married life, what did she do?
She was mostly a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah. And then your father, he worked a bit as a linesman. Was that also what he did for most of his married life, or?
No, that was a rather recent employment. He'd been, I guess it was quite a few years before he came to Provo that they were. Well, they lived in Hinckley, where I was born, on a farm, and Daddy did just odd jobs, whatever he could find. There wasn't any real work opportunities that were at all steady in Hinckley, then or ever, as far as I know. But Daddy was capable of doing so many things, which was wonderful. He wasn't afraid to try. And later, after they were in Provo, there was a shortage of skilled plasterers. Now, today they use sheetrock on walls.
Yeah.
They didn't have that then.
No.
It was lath and plaster.
Yeah.
And Dad learned to do a good job of plastering when he had an opportunity to be trained on the Works Progress Administration, WPA. And he became very skilled as a plasterer. And they had him, there was so much need with federal and state projects in Provo at the time that Dad learned to plaster, that he was able to work more than the 60 hours that were they should be limited to under the Works Progress Administration. So Dad would work twice what the other men would work in order to help fill the needs for a skilled plasterer at that time. And it was very helpful.
I'm sure. Especially, it sounds like you had a large family, so
yeah,
the extra income would have been fantastic. That's great. Now, what about your grandparents? Again, we talked a little bit about your mother's parents, how they had the store up in Randall. Tell me more about them, and then we'll talk about your father's in a second.
Okay. My grandmother inherited a strip of property down near Utah Lake, and they had a house built there.
Who did she inherit the property from?
From her grandfather, George Thomas Pay. And he had a number of children, so the strips of property down there not west of, it was on east of the lake, but west of town.
Yeah.
And so that each of those children, by the three wives, was given a strip of land.
I see.
My mother's was, I don't know whether mother was the oldest or not, but anyway, hers was closest to the highway that runs east of of Grandma's property over to what is now the Provo Airport.
I see. And what was your grandmother's name?
Emma Electa Pay Jacobson.
And what about your grandfather on that side?
Grandfather was
Grandpa
William
Jacobson.
Martin Jacobson.
What did he do? What was his?
He was mostly, well, he was a merchant, but also a farmer. And there in Provo on West Drive, he was. In Randolph, he was a merchant.
Yeah.
In Provo, he was a farmer.
What crops did they grow, or did it cycle?
Alfalfa, I think, mostly. But one of my memories that was a little different of the farm, Grandpa's farm down there, one spring the lake was extremely high. And it covered part of the property. It didn't come up to the yard where the house was, but it was the property closer to the lake was about a foot deep in water. And the carp, sometimes 2 feet long or so,
Wow.
were quite prominent in the lake at that time. And the boys would catch them with pitchforks. And then they were fed to the pigs or whatever.
What kinds of things did he sell up in his shop in Randolph?
In Randolph, it was general merchandise. I think he had a butcher shop there too.
Oh, yeah?
Because he was a skilled butcher. A butcher shop and general merchandise, I think. I should know more than I do about that.
It's all right. What about your father's parents?
My father's parents were considered in Randolph as for white people because they didn't own property and they didn't. I mean, they just their boys and all were got work when they could, where they could, wherever they could. But they become very capable of doing a lot of different things.
What were their names?
My father was, my gosh, I've forgotten, Edwin Theodore Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And his brothers, his older brother was Ted. It was Ted and William and Edgar, and where did their names get? What happened to my brain that they slipped out of it?
What about your father's mother? What was her name?
Laura Gunn.
He was the son of a gun?
She was a son of a, well, she was a daughter of a gun. My dad always said he was a son of a gun.
Yeah. And sorry,
Lost your script.
I dropped my paper. So what can you tell me about any of your family farther back from your grandparents?
My great-grandmother was a tiny little lady. She's the only one of them, other than my grandparents that I remember knowing. And she came from Denmark with a group of Mormon converts when she was 12 years old. Her older sister, whose name was Tina, and a brother, their last name was Sorensen, and she had a brother that was Sorensen. And those are the only ones that I remember knowing the names. How many there were, I don't know for sure. But there was Tina and Soren, and they were, I think both of them were older than my grandmother. My great-grandmother, that is.
Yeah. And now I've heard the family legend, and I'll ask you to confirm whether this is true or not. That the Pei line, the Pei family line, actually originally came over to the continent on the Mayflower. Am I remembering that right?
I can't remember how those connections were made, dear, but there was the one that was on the Mayflower was John Howland, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think we better get some more authoritative history before we try to put that together. I'd hate to have it recorded wrong.
All right. All right. So you did most of your growing up.
I was 8 when we came to Provo.
Yeah. So, but here in Utah at the very least. So down in Hinckley until you were 8, then you came up to Provo. Okay. Oh, this is phrased interestingly, but I'm going to read it verbatim out of the script here. Now, I'd like you to think back to the earliest thing you can remember. How old were you, and what was going on?
This is kind of, and how do you separate your own actual memory from what you've been told by others?
Yeah.
And that one that I probably don't really honestly remember, but it was after the water was running heavily in the irrigation canals that run through Millard County. Delvar and I were out. I don't know why anyway, we were playing outside, and Delvar had a new straw hat, and it was blown off as we were too close to the canal.
Uh-huh.
And he couldn't lose his hat. That was too important to him. So when Mother came looking for us, she saw the footprints go down to the canal and then come back up and go back along the canal and back down to the canal again. And each time we tried hard to reach that hat, it wasn't reachable. But finally, it got caught on a bridge that went across the canal. And Delvar was able to rescue his hat by laying on his tummy and reaching over to the water to where the hat was caught.
Yeah.
But Mother was mighty relieved when she saw the two of us.
Oh, I'm sure.
And we weren't even wet.
As a side note, that is the first question in our early childhood memories. So this is about the time before you would have started going to a kindergarten or a school or something like that.
Kindergarten wasn't available yet.
Oh, out of curiosity, so we can tailor these. How old were you when you first started going to a school?
6.
6. All right. So this is the time period area that we're looking at here.
And then I was late enough in this year, that I'd been 6 for several months before I was eligible to go to school.
Okay. So talk about the area where you lived there in Hinckley. What did your house look like, and the property
really
around it and stuff like that?
No memory of what the house was like, except that it was frame, and it seems like it was. Well, we lived in several different houses, and I don't remember enough about them. But all the houses that were there were frame houses.
You lived in several different houses in Hinckley?
Yeah.
Huh? What caused you to move around so much?
Well, they were all rentals, and a rental is an unstable rental because it was just for a little while the owners were doing something different or in between this, that, or the other.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Daddy bought some surplus property and was getting it ready for us to live in when there was the recession hit even harder, and he lost what he had purchased. And that's when we moved from Hinckley to Provo. That's when he lost that property.
Yeah. What was your father doing that time? What was his occupation?
Anything he could find to work.
Just handyman at the time. Yeah.
He was capable of doing a lot of things, but it was later than that when he learned to do the plastering.
Yeah. There we are. Again, just to provide some kind of historical context and such, if people haven't studied it thoroughly, you were born again in 1924.
Mm-hmm.
In America, in 1929, August of that year, we had the Great Depression, where just the economy sunk and everything. It's kind of sad to think about, but that's something that you lived through and had to deal with in your life at the time.
Well, as I remember, which is very vague, because before the recession, Daddy didn't have steady employment anyway. So it didn't make it any worse for him. But other people were affected quite seriously.
Yeah. And I guess I shouldn't minimize this. This affected the entire world really at the time, but obviously where you lived in Utah during that entire time, the U.S. is mostly what.
I think in Utah it wasn't
about
as
it.
bad as it was in some places, but I could be wrong about that too.
Yeah. Well, Utah has a lot of cultural things that would have helped it along. But what else do you remember about the time before you started going to school? Just your life and childhood back then.
I remember that we had a stack of what they called, where'd I've lost it now, greasewood for cooking and keeping the house warm. And greasewood was some kind of a trash wood that grew out on the desert, and it had to be quite dry, if I remember right, for it to really burn well. And but it burned with a vengeance when it was dry enough to burn. And one time, Arlene got too close to where they were cutting with an axe the greasewood into usable pieces. She got hit in the forehead, and she carried a nasty scar on her forehead the rest of her life. And I was glad it wasn't me as a child.
Yeah. Did you have any schooling before elementary school?
No.
No. So, where did you start going to elementary school? You said you were 6 at the time, so this would have been somewhere in Hinckley?
Yes.
Do you remember the name of the school?
It was the Hinckley Elementary School,
Mm-hmm.
as near as I can remember.
Yeah.
I went first and second grade there.
Okay.
And I think the teacher taught both grades. I wish I could remember her last name. I'm quite sure the first name was Mary. But it's gone.
Would this happen to be the same? This is my sarcastic voice, listeners. Would this happen to be the same Mary who was the midwife at your birth?
No, I'm sure it wasn't. Well, I'm reasonably sure it wasn't, because the school teacher was very young, and I'm sure the midwife was more mature.
Yeah. What kind of school was it? Was it like just a schoolhouse, or were there different rooms?
Yes, there was the schoolhouse with different rooms, but I think the school was small enough that probably each teacher taught 2 grades.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing at that because I have no real honest memory and no record of it.
Question: was there like a school uniform or anything like that, or?
No.
Just, um. Again, quoting verbatim from our script here. Now, I'd like you to think back to an incident in grade school which you remember well. What was it? What happened? What was going on?
I remember there was some kind of probably a Christmas presentation, kind of a play-like thing or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that I had just a few words to say, and I was supposed to be able to lisp, and I couldn't. In practice, I could lisp, but on stage, it just would not come. And I remember the line as being, "Look at me, only see my little blue-eyed something," or the name of the doll.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what that name was.
On Christmas play. And then, of course, when you moved to Provo, did you get into an elementary school here as well?
Yes. And that first winter, our whole family, how many of us were there? There was Delvar, Elda, Arlene, and Amy. Arnold and Charles hadn't been born yet. And Amy wasn't in school. So, anyway.
How did you get to school?
By bus. If we were ready to go when the bus came. If not, it was an hour's walk.
Oh, heavens. So about how far away from your home?
3 miles.
It was 3 miles. Was that the Franklin Elementary then?
Mm-hmm.
Where was that? Because there is a Franklin Elementary in Provo now,
The school that is the Franklin Elementary now has been anyway, the Franklin School was demolished and that one was built new
but it was on the
since
same
then.
property.
But it was on the same property, except that it was closer to 7th West. I mean, the front of the building was on 7th West, and now it seems to be
It is
east
on
of it.
6th West, yeah,
6th
now.
West, yeah.
Absolutely. What were your grades like in school, in elementary school, your grammar school?
Well, reasonable, but not exceptional, because there were communicable diseases in Provo that we didn't know, that we didn't have when we were out in the small town.
Yeah.
And so we had to cycle through all those communicable diseases, and so we missed a lot of school.
Oh, that must have been rough.
But you know, it would have been had we not been good students.
I'm sure.
But for some reason or other, we were blessed with minds that accepted the schooling quite nicely.
Awesome. Now, thinking still during the same age, but not about the school itself. What was your home life at that time? You were living down at on your grandparents' farm, or at least a portion of that.
Yeah. Well, actually, we were living right in our grandparents' home.
Oh yeah.
And they had their younger children were still there. There was Sterling and Jess, and Fawn and Bob, at least the 4 of their children, plus there was Delvar and myself and Arlene and Amy. I think the others were younger after we got into another place.
And just to make sure I've got it right, this was your mother's parents, the Jacobsons, right?
Right.
While you were growing up, did you have, just as a child, did you have any sense of whether you were, rich or poor, just kind of your economic circumstances when you were growing up? Did you have an idea of?
I think we were about average.
Uh-huh.
I know there were some in the school that were superior to us because they had more money, but
At least they like to act that way.
they like to act that way. I don't know how they really felt because I can't get in the minds of other people, but
yeah.
But for the most part, I think we felt. One of the things that I remember feeling so keenly as to feel really secure was that Mother and Dad were always happy together. Ours was a happy family.
And that's always the most important. Now, were there any pets as part of your happy family?
Any what?
Pets, dogs or cats or the like.
I only remember one, and that's when I was in high school.
Oh.
We called him Dopey. He was a little white. Daddy called him a Spitz, 57 varieties. But he was white dog with a black eye and a curly tail.
So,
he was a cute little dog.
Were there any other animals on the farm, horses or the like?
We had a cow, and that even after we came to Provo, we had a cow.
Mm-hmm.
And when we lived over on 3rd South in Provo, there was a kind of a cooperative thing, and the cows would be taken to pasture during the day and then brought home to the different residences
At night?
in the evening. And I'm sure that each family did their share of the caring for those cows, of the herding and bringing them back from pasture, that sort of thing.
So let's talk about where you lived in Provo. Not quite to your high school years, but after Hinckley, you moved into the Jacobson farm.
Just 1 year at Grandpa's, and then the house we were able to rent in Provo was that I wish I could remember the house number for sure. I think it was 345 West, 3rd South. Maybe someday we'll take a drive and I'll find out.
Yeah, it's
double check that.
just around the corner here.
Yeah, it's not very far away. And I'd recognize the house, so the house number. I'm sure there's 2 families at least in that house now.
The building itself, you think, still is there?
I've seen it recently.
That's awesome.
And it had an upstairs to it, but the only bath in the house at that time was on the main floor.
But there was indoor plumbing, which was nice.
Yes. And there was indoor plumbing down at Grandma and Grandpa's. And that was an improvement.
I'm sure. Where did you live after that?
After that,
Or actually, no, sorry. How long did you live there first, and then where did you go?
I think I was in the 4th grade when we moved there. The 3rd or 4th grade. And I was in junior high when we moved into the basement that Daddy had built up on what became 10th North, but I think now it's posted as 960 North, just west, well, a block and a half west of University Avenue.
What was around you at the time?
Nothing.
Nothing, just up in a nice
There
field.
was a pasture to the north of us, and every time in the summer that they irrigated that pasture, we got about this much water in the basement we were living in. And that was not fun to clean up.
No, I'm sure. And did you live there until you were married, or did you live with your family there until you were married,
Yes,
or did your family move again?
Daddy finished, built the upper part of the house before I got married.
So the last couple questions I have about elementary school here is just, were you happy as a young child?
Yes, I was. As I became more and more aware of lives the other kids led and stuff like that, I realized how fortunate I was. Because as far as I could see, even my cousins didn't have as happy a life at home as I did. Because my Jacobson relatives were kind of somber people, and my father was an especially happy man.
So during that time, what was your relationship like with your parents?
I never doubted the love my parents had for me. Mother wasn't as affectionate as Daddy was, but that didn't stop her from being a lovable mother and a loving mother. But she was a little less affectionate than Daddy was. Daddy's affection knew no ends. So I was spoiled rotten on that one.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is our hour up and done with. Thank you all for watching. I think, because we still got quite a bit left to go just through this list, and then I have other ideas of things to continue on after that. So I'm hoping we can do this again in later weeks, maybe next week, depending on how schedules line up, etc., etc. Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it, yes.
Good, I'm glad. All right. Well, all of you watching live, thank you. Those who are watching the video on demand later, thank you also for watching. Everybody have a great day. And, of course, Grandma, thank you so much as well.
Now, this is going to be something you can go back to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't, because that would just be... I mean, it would be fun to do live, but it would be a waste if we could watch it again and again as time goes on.
Well, that sounds interesting. We can rehearse this before we go on to the next one.
Maybe. All right. Thank you so much.